What I want to talk about now is comparisons. We've been talking about adjectives and adverbs as modifiers, and I also want you to know that you can use adjectives and adverbs to compare things. Adverbs and adjectives both have two forms that we can use when we make comparisons, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now, if you look at this little chart that I've made for you, you can see that using adjectives and adverbs to make comparisons can be done in a couple of different ways. You can use adjectives and adverbs as modifiers without making a comparison, like in the first box, and look at the example. In most legends, Coyote is a smart trickster. We're not comparing Coyote to anything, but we're using the adjective smart to modify the word trickster. Then we can talk about comparing Coyote to other things. So first we're going to talk about the comparative form. You use the comparative form when you're comparing two things, or two people, or two places. Look at the example. Coyote is smarter than Wolf at outwitting people. So now we're looking at the differences between Coyote and Wolf, and we're saying Coyote is smarter than Wolf. When we need to compare three or more persons, places, or things, we use a form that's called superlative. Let's look at the example for that. Coyote is the smartest of all the animals. So now we're comparing Coyote to all the other animals, and when we do that, we use what's called the superlative form. So let's take a look at how we make these different forms. Now, most modifiers are changed in regular ways, and I'm going to show you what those regular ways are. Most of the time, if you have a one-syllable word or a lot of two-syllable words, to form the comparative, you put ER on the end. So look at the examples here. Tougher. That's taking a one-syllable word, putting it in the comparative form by adding ER. Then we also have happier. That's a two-syllable word. You got to change the Y to an I on words like happy, but sometimes you might just stick ER on the end. It depends on the word, and you'll know if it looks right or wrong. Then, if we're going to make the superlative form out of most one-syllable words, all we do is put EST on the end. Toughest. Taking that same one-syllable word, changed it to the superlative form by putting EST on the end. Same thing with happy. Change the Y to an I, put EST on the end. So now we've made tough comparative by saying tougher, and superlative by saying toughest. We've changed happy to comparative by saying happier, and to the superlative by saying happiest. Now let's talk about how if we have two-syllable words that just aren't going to sound right if we add just a suffix on the end. Take, for example, the word helpless. We're not going to say helplesser. We're going to say more helpless. We're not going to say helplessest. We're going to say most helpless. So if it just sounds weird or awkward, you might want to think about using more or most instead of ER or EST. If you don't know which one to use, try sounding it out. That'll usually help quite a lot. Now, if we have more words that are more than two syllables, like important, we're going to put more important for the comparative, most important for the superlative. Or if we have adverbs that end in ly, we would say more quickly or most quickly. We're not going to say quicklier or quickliest. It's kind of a funny word, and it's sort of fun to say, but it doesn't work. So we're going to use more or most. So most of the time, those are really easy ways to figure that out. Here's what you want to watch out for, though. You don't want to use the superlative form, the EST form, or the most form when you're only comparing two things. Let me look at the example here. Here's the non-standard thing. Of the two stories, which was the most exciting? Now, there's a lot of times we would say this in conversation, and we wouldn't think anything about it. But when we're going to be writing, and we're only comparing two things, we need to use the correct form. So here is what the correct form would be. Of the two stories, which was the more exciting? Because we're only comparing two things. If we were comparing three or more stories, we could say, of all the stories that you read, which was the most exciting? That would be okay. But when we're only comparing two, use more, because that's going to be the comparative form. Now, some modifiers have irregular comparative and superlative forms. Let me look at the example here. He thinks storytelling is good and practical jokes are better but tricks to get rich are the best of all. This is an example of good, better, best. We're not going to go gooder, we're not going to go goodest, and we're not going to use more or most. Let me show you a little chart that I've made you to help you understand some of these. These are some very common irregular forms. Now, if you look at good, as we just did in our example, we have good, better, best. We also use better and best if we're saying well. It's like I did well, I did better, I did best. So both of those words, good and well, use better and best in their comparative and superlative forms. What about far? We're not going to say it was farer, we're going to say it's farther, or we can even say further. Both of those words work perfectly fine. In the superlative form, we have farthest and furthest. This is a unique thing that we're adding letters to the original word to make the superlative and comparative forms. That doesn't happen in very many words. Then we have bad. We don't say bad or badder and baddest. We say bad, worse, and worst. The word much in the comparative form is more, and the superlative form is most, and the same thing with the word many. We have more and most as comparative and superlative. Then we get to little. Now, around here in Texas, we say littler and littlest all the time. And as I said before, in conversation, we all know what that means. But it's important to know the correct forms also. The correct comparative form for little is less or lesser, and the superlative form is least. So it is important to know the difference. Even though in conversation with our friends and with our family, we're all going to say littler and littlest, and we'll know exactly what we mean. But like I said, I do want you to understand the difference between the way it's okay to speak and the way we need to be writing so that it's correct. Now, here's why it matters. When you understand the differences between comparative and superlative forms, you're going to know that you're choosing the correct forms in your writing. And as always, it's going to make your writing easier to understand and more enjoyable for whoever's reading it.